My name is Brittany Gilliam. I'm authenticating my final project for this course. Awesome.
All right, so here is everything you need to know about the assessment process from a current non-tenured special educator. So speaking from my current experience, how does the assessment process even begin? The assessment process typically begins after a child suspects of disability has been referred to the school IEP team, or if a parent has requested a team, the team meets to discuss all their different current levels of performance in academic, social, behavioral, speech, OT, PT, and even cognitive needs if applicable. And this is usually done by inviting the appropriate staff to the team meeting. After this, what happens is that the team of professionals, along with the parents, will decide if testing is needed. And then, in order to perform testing, a parent must sign off on forms that allow for their child or student to be tested and evaluated by members of the school staff and of the team. One of the first areas is that of intelligence. So intelligence is typically measured or evaluated or assessed by a licensed school psychologist. An example of one of the tests that my school psychologist uses is the Wechsler Intelligence Scale. This scale is used to measure IQ for verbal comprehension, visual spatial index, fluid reasoning, working memory index, as well as processing speed. Then what happens is an IQ score is generated, and we can talk about which categories may have lower or higher scores and why that may be. And this plays into that role as we move forward through the assessment process with other assessments being done by other staff members, and we start to see trends. Next is that of academic performance. So this is kind of done in conjunction, special education and general education. So for example, like a record review of previous academic achievement may be done for that school year, for prior years. This record review is often conducted using curriculum-based measures and even standard testing scores. So in my school, we often look at MAP assessments or any other state testing data that we might have. You can also look at different unit assessment grades that the student has had throughout the course of that academic year, or if you were available to get previous year testing data, you can also use that data as well. Another thing too is a formal education assessment should be conducted if it's signed off. And so some examples that we use in my building are the Woodcock-Johnson, the Young Children's Achievement Test, also known as the YCAT, or the Learning Accomplishment Profile Diagnostic, which is also known as a LAPD. I typically use the Woodcock-Johnson. It has 11 subtests. These subtests are all in different reading, writing, and math kind of categories. And so what we use this is to generate scores based off of a child's age. And then we compare that normative score that we get to where they should be according to their age. So this is a big deal because often we look at grade level, but when you're doing an educational assessment for the Woodcock-Johnson, you are looking at their results as related to their age. And this is just really important because when we get into development, it'll kind of piece together that developmentally where they are for their age is a bit more important necessarily than where they are for their grade level. Another thing for academic performance you can do is informal assessments. Personally, I like to do these after the Woodcock-Johnson when I see some weakness areas. So some examples that I gave of informal assessments I currently use are using the Dolch sight word lists, those high frequency words, and then the heart phonemic awareness assessment. So if I see a break in phonological awareness, I'll give them a heart phonemic awareness assessment to see where that break specifically is. If there's an issue with fluency or any issue with some sight words that I can think of off the top of my head, I might give them a Dolch sight word list to kind of check that. The next category is language. So language is typically assessed by the speech language pathologist. We do need a language referral, and you can have a language referral for things like expressive, receptive, articulation, or pragmatics. So the speech language pathologist will do an assessment that includes parent questionnaires, teacher questionnaires, formal assessments, language samples, observations, and even a record review. So I listed some of the examples of different questionnaires and assessments a speech language pathologist might do. Um, so ours has done oral language impact on educational performance. That will go to the special educator, the general educator, really anybody that works closely with the student in the educational setting. She typically sends home the oral language impact on social performance questionnaire to families, so that way we get a school and home kind of basis of what profile of what our student is like. Some of the tests she's given is the clinical evaluation of language fundamentals, also the test of word finding. Another area that we work through the assessment process is perceptual functioning. Again, this is usually performed by our licensed school psychologist. Some examples of tests she might give are the wide range assessment of memory learning. So that's really looking at that memory and recall. She's also given the comprehensive test of phonological processing. So this is more phonological awareness and memory, as well as symbolic naming. And I find it important to write that and memory part because as a special educator, when I test for phonological awareness, it's awareness, right? I'm not looking at that memory. The school psychologist is really able to kind of look at more of what's happening in the brain as far as cognitively what they're perceiving. So this is definitely there's a big difference in when the school psychologist tests for phonological awareness and memory versus when a special educator kind of tests phonological awareness. As far as like, for me, phonological awareness would be what's the first sound you hear in the word cat, right? But the school psychologist might be giving them something they have to hold phonologically in their head and then repeat back in a more complex manner. The next process of assessment area is behavior. So behavior observations can be taken into account. In our school, our teacher report always has a general educator writing what their behavioral observations are within the classroom environment. And then a classroom observation can also be performed by a school guidance counselor to speak on student behavior. So they will often take whatever the concerns behaviorally are that a teacher or staff might have. They'll kind of observe to see those concerns. They'll talk about strengths. They'll talk about weaknesses in their reports. They'll talk about did they interact socially with others? Did they participate in the lesson? So it's really good to have that aspect too, also having a third party kind of look instead of just the teacher that works closely with the student. We also should be taking into account a review of any disciplinary actions. So if a student has behavior referrals, if a student's been suspended, if, along those lines, those need to be taken into account when we're thinking about behavior. Another thing that you can do is collect antecedent behavior consequence data. And this is just to see, are there any reoccurring behaviors? If so, what are the triggers and how are we effectively dealing with them? If you need to take it one step further and make it a little bit more formal, you can perform a functional behavior assessment, which does take a little bit longer because you need the observations and the ABC data on top of it to pinpoint a specific behavior, what the function of that behavior is, and then what the replacement behavior will be. And how you're going to reach that replacement behavior. So this then gets translated into what we call a behavior intervention plan. And then we would present that at the next team with the rest of the assessment results. Our next area of assessment is that of physical development. So the process for physical development, we often look at a record review to see if there are any abnormalities in the child's development. So some of the things that we've looked for or asked for in a team, especially if it's an initial, is was there a premature birth? Were there birth complications or was there trauma during the birth? Did the student receive child find services? Because often if they did receive child find services, we are able to get that information. And also receiving those child find services may mean that there was, delay or something involved in the physical development to get them those child find services. So it's very important in terms of physical development. Also, If you have an occupational or physical therapy referral, then we can have physical development looked at by a licensed occupational or physical therapist. So quite often we use our occupational therapist to look at fine motor skills, handwriting skills, things along those lines. And our physical therapist, looks at those a lot more of those gross motor skills. Our physical therapist does attend some of our PE courses to kind of see how the student functions in the PE classroom, walking, standing, gait, all of those types of things. The next area is that of social emotional functioning. So this can be very relative to the behavior data that is collected. A lot of times with the behavior data that's collected, it can be social emotional in nature. However, we could also have our school psychologist perform testing to measure this in a form of a rating scale. So a rating scale that she does use is that as the Piers-Harris Self-Concept Scale, third edition. This scale measures self-concept in children, adolescents, and young adults, and it also identifies individuals who may need further testing or treatment. Again, we can also have the guidance counselor perform a classroom observation, just like with the behavior. You can obtain parent and teacher input through the use of rating scales here. And another thing that's not mentioned in this PowerPoint, but something we do at my school, is that of having the social worker kind of come in and talk with the student or screen the student as well for possible social work services, which we have at our school as well. And so because a lot of this had my personal experience with the assessment process and the categories, I did cite what we used in our course, the National Association of Special Education Teachers, NASIT for short. But again, a lot of this is from my personal experience as a third year new kind of conditionally certified teacher. Thank you for your time.